my name is Katie Lauder, and I'm going to be giving a presentation on dyscalculia today. So, dyscalculia is a neurological learning disorder that affects how students process numbers when they're learning math. And this can be students that don't normally struggle with other subjects like language arts or science, but they do have kind of that difficulty processing numbers. So what this can look like is a difficulty when they're learning numbers, learning how to map out numbers, learning how to measure like time, money, feet, inches, stuff like that. Just basic, math facts that other students might be able to comprehend a little bit quicker. So this affects 3 to 7% of children in the United States, both equally boys and girls. It doesn't target one certain gender like we normally see with other learning disabilities, but it can affect them going into the rest of their life. High school, college, they choose to do it when they go into the workforce. It does normally continue to affect them into their adulthood. This happens for a few reasons. Most of them are genetic, ADHD, dyslexia, it can occur with those, and those are also genetic. So, typically if one parent has dyscalculia, the other is going to have it as well. But it also does affect the part of your brain that does process those numbers and those letters. Not letters, those just those numbers and how they process math. So this can be diagnosed, typically, like, I've talked about those school-age children, K through 6 is typically when they get diagnosed with dyscalculia, right in that elementary school range. Normally, by the time they're in middle school, they've already been diagnosed. It requires some testing through paraprofessionals, and how that gets, brought about is teachers will notice the struggles and kind of diagnose with that. It obviously, students are impacted in so many ways by it. It plays a part in their grades. If they're not comprehending math, their grades aren't going to be amazing. But it doesn't just impact their academics. It also impacts if they can't, tell the time. If they can't multiply by 5 on the analog clock. That's something that's going to impact, when they arrive to school or later on when they arrive to work if they are having trouble reading a clock like that. But also directions. If they mix up the numbers and an address, they're going to go to the wrong place, and that's just going to affect kind of what they do. And that can take a toll on their confidence and their self-esteem. And confidence and self-esteem are, two of those 40 assets that help a child thrive in their childhood. One of the most well-known of these evidence-based strategies to help students is the CPA method. And what that is you start off with a concrete object. So this can look like blocks or counters or, shape objects. Just something that students can physically touch and see while they're going through this. That really does help them a lot, and it goes a long way to be able to see it in front of them and move it around. After they've, gotten really, really good at that, you can go into the pictorial segment of it, and that is visuals. So, having that graph or a number line, just something that they can see but not necessarily touch, can also help them kind of get it more so than the concrete objects, but it does challenge them just a little bit more as you start incorporating those numbers. And then for the hardest segment of it would be that abstract where you're adding in the symbols, like the equations, that 3 plus 2 equals 5, that gets all jumbled around when they try to process that. But if they've been working with the concrete and the pictorial, they are more prone to understand the abstract later on, instead of starting with the abstract and working backwards, so to speak. And that just helps them, it's low stakes, they can get immediate feedback with that. If you say, hey, you're supposed to have 2 purple blocks here and you only have 1, it kind of helps them understand in that way. Other evidence-based strategies would just include, digital strategies. Like I've stated before, those number lines and counters, those really do help when helping out students learn their math. Um, some accommodations. You can give a student extra time on quizzes and tests. You can give them calculators if the assignment permits. Step-by-step instructions, just kind of breaking down those problems for them, having, things that they can see and things that they can touch can go a long way, giving them feedback, alternative assignments, shorter assignments maybe, just, working with accommodations as well as, IEPs would be a good one. Following that IEP or recommending that that is put in place for the student. And now we're going to watch some videos that I have recorded just to help with accommodations. Alright, and then we're going to put on the second video. Bear with me. Alright, thank you for taking the time to watch those videos with me. So, moving on, we're going to talk about those UDL guidelines. So starting with engagement, those videos, those real-world examples can get students really engaged when they can tie it into what they're learning and they can really see it come to life in that sense. Representation, representing them in that way, students want to feel seen and heard, so you can play a video, you can have it, read it aloud to them, just something that really does help them, feel represented in a classroom, because that's super important. And then that action expressions would be going back to those digital things that are becoming more prominent and more prevalent in today's society. But also knowing that not only is there multiple ways to show learning, but there is multiple ways to teach it. And I think a lot of teachers get stuck in that kind of, they teach it one way, but they don't really know how to teach it another way because they do it for so long. So just, learning that it is okay to change how you teach something. And dyscalculia is so important to recognize and to understand in our society, because the earlier you diagnose it, the earlier that a student can, get those accommodations and they know kind of what is wrong with them, so to speak, even though there's nothing really wrong with them. It's just how their brain processes. It's nothing that they can, it's nothing that they could have changed about themselves. But it can also prevent academic gaps, and what that is if they wait until 6th grade to get those accommodations and, say that there's something wrong, they're already all of those years behind their peers, and they don't really understand kind of what's going on. But, if they get diagnosed in first grade, that's that whole 5 years that they could have had those accommodations put into place to help. It also helps educators help them, Once they're diagnosed, it's easier for educators to help, and it's easier to go into that mode of helping your students, learn. And then it also just promotes an understanding of diverse learners. So, kind of what that can look like is students helping students, I think is the easiest way to put that. I'm sure we've all worked in a group project where we had one classmate that maybe wouldn't have known the content as well, but just having students understand what dyscalculia is can really help them with their peers and help them bond with their peers and, understand that this classmate just needs a little bit more help. Thank you so much for watching my presentation on dyscalculia, and I do hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about how you can help your students and how this disability affects their day-to-day life. Thank you.